What's up, family? This is your man, not your boy, Go Black to Africa. So I want to share this video that I videotaped when I was in Ghana. And this was probably 4 or 5 years ago. And I want those out there to listen to a taste of Ghana's history that's been around for over 500 years. For those who doubt slavery existed, for those who does not understand of going black, to reconnect from our ancestors who waited for the day for all of us to return from where they were taken. I say, learn and see what all is there to be. Take a listen to this.
Spit on it. Spit on it. Spit on it. Them jokers got the hell out of here, didn't they? Yeah, them jokers got.
I'll say that you all are warmly welcome to the land of the ancestors. Well, I am going to take you through the dungeons of Cape Coast Castle and see several other important parts. But then I want you to know that your questions are welcome. You can also contribute to exactly what we are doing here. And just in case there's something you don't really understand, please call my attention to it. That's what I'm here for. The name is Sebastian Kwame Natete, but you can call me Kwame. It's much simple and easy. Where you are is called Cape Coast Castle, but I want you all to know that at that time, when the Europeans were here, this place wasn't a castle, but rather a factory. Why was it a factory? Because it had lots of storage spaces, be it the dungeon or storage space for gold, ivory, spices, and several other places. But then, Africans that were even held in the dungeons were not seen as humans, but rather as goods, or let's say commodities, by the white folk. And they thought that Africans do not have a soul, and they are, that of Satan's, so they are taking them from Africa to be saved in the Americas and in Europe. So looking at the whole thing, you realize that the Europeans earlier came to Africa not only to trade, but also to spread the gospel, converting people into becoming Christians, just to counteract the Arabs from spreading Islamic religion throughout the African continent, and also break the Arab gold monopoly. But then there came a time they began the transatlantic slave trade, all in the name of labor in the Americas and in Europe. And so they started taking our ancestors from the motherland to the New World. And this actually went on for a period of about 400 years on the continent of Africa. But I want each and every one of us here to know for a fact that without the involvement of some Africans, this transatlantic slave trade wouldn't have lasted a period of about 400 years on the continent of Africa. Which means some Africans played a very important role in everything, and literally, we are going to say that there will be no smoke without fire. If you see a smoke somewhere, there's a fire underneath it somewhere. So, even though it's very sad to hear this, but some of our ancestors also played a major role in giving our brothers and sisters out to the Europeans for them to take them away. And whenever they brought people, European money had no value to any African around here. That is why they practiced the barter system of trade, exchange of materials. They received guns, gunpowder, whiskey, rum, teacups, ceramic plates, and lots of other European items. From these Europeans, they give them gold, ivory, spices, African men, women, and several other stuff. And that is what we call the triangular trade between the three continents, Europe, Africa, and the Americas. So then the Europeans will bring all cheap European merchandise down here to Africa. Then they use these things to get very expensive African commodities. Then they'll move everything from Africa. They get to the Americas. What will they do? They will only offload African men and women on the fields, working on sugarcane plantations, cotton fields, and so many other things, you name them. And after doing all of that, they will take sugar. And know that amongst Europeans, sugar was a very important commodity, called white gold at that time. As well as they would take indigo, tobacco, coffee, and other stuff. In addition, move everything to Europe to feed the industries out there, and money that was made out of it was what they used in building Europe and the United States of America. And so that is what we call the triangular trade. And so with a triangle, moving from Europe to Africa will be the outward passage. From Africa to the Americas will be the middle passage. And Americas back to Europe will be the inward passage. But wonderful people. The people that arrived here were not all from Ghana. They brought them from several parts of Africa. But I want you all to know for a fact that the biggest chunk was taken from West Africa. So from several West African nations, African men and women had to be moved from all over. And they had to walk barefooted, either tied up or in shackles and chains. Know that as they moved them, there were people that became so weak and sick that they had to be abandoned. But I am not going to abandon you to go back home and tell what I have done to you. That is why I would rather tie you to a tree and leave you there. It's either you die on your own or you be killed by an animal. Then I moved down with the very strong ones. Whenever they arrived at Asin Mansu slave market, they were made to have their last bath. You take their last bath from over there, then people that have been bought already will be branded and everything. Then they send them down to the various forts and castles along the coast. There are about 66 forts and castles in West Africa. I want you all to know that Ghana has got about 90% of it. It was because Ghana was known for its gold. So originally this place was known as Gold Coast. That is why most of the Europeans wanted to live here and enjoy from the proceeds of the gold they were getting. So they built most of the forts around here. But then we have 3 castles in West Africa, and all of them were built in Ghana. So these were the biggest trading posts the Europeans had in West Africa. And the first one happens to be the St. George's Castle, or Elmina Castle, built by the Portuguese 1482. And that is about 536 years, but originally it wasn't built as a slave castle. So there was nothing like a dungeon there until the Portuguese began the transatlantic slave trade, where they converted storage rooms into dungeons where they held African captives for more than a century before other European nations also decided to go here and take part in it. And then there is another one in Accra called Christiansborg Castle, built by the Danes, 1661, which is about 357 years, second biggest, second oldest. And it was built as a slave castle. But if you all today are looking to visit the biggest slave castle in the whole of West Africa, you are at the right place at the right time. That's Cape Coast Castle. This place was built at the time when transatlantic slave trade was at the highest level. So then the British chose to build much bigger dungeons to accommodate about 1,300 African men and women at a go. Well, my brothers and sisters, where we are now served as an auction block, a market, a place where the Europeans auctioned off everything from African men, women, gold, ivory, spices, and so many other materials. And it's named Palaver Hall. The word palaver is actually Portuguese, which means argument. So if it's going to be argument, then it will be argument over prices here. That is why they gave this space that name, Palaver Hall. But if you look at it carefully, it looks like a ballroom. Well, I want you all to know that it wasn't a ballroom. It was a market. And so this shows you all that the Europeans, as they stayed in this very fort, lived in very nice and beautiful spaces. But then when we go down, we start visiting the dungeons and everything, you realize that our ancestors were treated very differently. They would have been able to end it quick. The reason is that the European power never got anywhere than the fire of their gun. So then, if let's say I'm an African, these people want to get my people, I can, use some ways to just stop them. So let's talk about Benin. During the transatlantic slave trade, the king there at that time came to realize that everything that has been happening is insane. So he has to stop it. His will was, I am not going to sell African men to you anymore. I can sell you all of my women, but I won't give you men. But the Europeans, looking at the whole thing, they needed strong field hands. They needed men who can work the fields. So they were like, if you're not going to sell us men, we don't buy your women. And that instantly killed the slave trade in Benin. And there came a time the people of Elmina had built that hatred for the Portuguese. They wanted the Portuguese to leave their land. But, you know, the Portuguese were doing so many things to them that they didn't want to stand up, because what shows that the guns you've been giving me are better guns. Because most of these materials they brought were second-hand materials. And so they decided, we are going to hold on. But they realized that the Dutch have been trying to fight the Portuguese. 2 consecutive times they did not succeed. Then the people of Elmina rose up and said, we are going to join the Dutch to fight the Portuguese, to defeat them. Maybe when the Dutch come, they will not do the same things the Portuguese have been doing to us. So they joined forces with the Portuguese, the Dutch, sorry. They fought the Portuguese, they defeated them hands down. And when the Dutch took over Elmina Castle around 1637, they started making expansions. And they started fueling everything the more in Elmina Castle. So the people went back to zero. So if people do say that Africans never fought, I would just say that they are just lying. There came a time Africans fought, but hey, there were majority of them that were so much addicted to power and riches and everything that they were not ready to going back. That's probably.
Is it so that not just the transatlantic is where the slaves were actually sent, but also went around Africa to India and China?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes, that's very true. But then there came a time these Europeans even started moving Indians from their own home to Africa. So much so that today, if you go to South Africa, they have the biggest Indian population outside of India. And so they did a whole lot of crazy stuff, brother. They did a whole lot. I want all of us to exercise a minute silence and say a prayer for all the souls that were lost in here. You can call on the spirit of your ancestors. You can say their names, and you know, anybody that comes into mind that is very important, that made some changes, please, you can talk about all of them. Right. So this is the men's dungeon, which starts from this room all the way down to the other side. There are 5 of such rooms in the men's dungeon. It was all designed for at least 700 men or 1,000 men. So if we are going to say 1,000 men in all, then mathematically we will state that each of these rooms held about 200 African men. But then there were buckets provided in the rooms. So if the men and women will want to defecate and everything, they will have to reach to that bucket and do it in it. But for 24 hours and 3 months of the stay in the dungeons, all the African men were in shackles and chains. If you are in shackles and chains, holes around here, which will be the only source of light and air, will have no nets covering it. So there were flies that always entered the dungeons. Diarrhea, dysentery, malaria fever, and several other diseases will be very much in abundance amidst the people. You are going to make an effort moving from where you are to that bucket, but because of the shackles and chains on you, you'll be slowed down. The population will slow you down. You have diarrhea. Defecating yourself is very easy. That is why majority of the African men and women had to even stay where they are, defecate there, urinate there, and sleep there. And they will be fed twice a day. But you don't eat with a plate, you eat using your palm. And know that these hands will never be washed. Because their last bath was taken about 31 kilometers away from here at a place called Asin Mansu Slave Market. You take your last bath from there, you walk from there to here. Even driving to that place takes about an hour. How much more walking? By the time you end up here, you are already filthy. And food they gave them was nothing to satisfy anybody, but to keep them going from time to time. Because of all these, you will sometimes find African men and women dead in the dungeons. They will never bury them. They just pick up the dead bodies, take them out of here, and drop them into the sea. But if I'm going to drop a dead body into the sea, I know very well that the next day the body will be lying on the shore. That is why they would rather tie the bodies up with cannonballs and drop it so it sinks. And because it was so dark in the dungeons, whenever African men and women were taken out, they normally became partially blind. They couldn't see properly. But wonderful guest, when slave trade was almost over, the Europeans decided to stop cleaning the dungeons of the castle. So African servants who were supposed to clean, whenever they moved the population in the dungeons out, they came here instead of cleaning, rather to cover everything up with sand. Know that what you are standing on is the original floor, made up of bent bricks and trenches. But then in the other rooms, everything you are going to walk on will not be the original floor, because it's covered up with feces, urine, food particles, and so many things, which there came a time they covered it up with sand. And whenever they brought African men and women back into the dungeons, everything was so high that you're going to walk on top of it, but it will be up to your ankle level. And that is what we have all over the place. It's solidly piled up on the floor. So hard that when you walk on it, it feels like you're walking on a normal floor, but it's not normal. That is what I call the DNA of the ancestors that stayed here. We're wonderful people. The floors of the dungeons were built a bit higher than each other. So the first floor is higher than the second, and it continues in that order. There are trenches all over the place which moved liquid waste from each room. So looking at the whole thing, it means that every liquid waste from the first room enters the second, third, fourth, fifth before it enters the sea. How much more the waste from all the other rooms which will end up in the fifth room? The stench from it, the heat from it, and all of that. Because of all these things, people fell really sick. And as I said, people died. But then know that the mortality rate was so high because all these Africans that came here were very strong men and women. They survived this. And when they survived this, they ended up surviving the ships, ended up in the Americas and survived it. And today we are here. So this tells all of us here that we are from the strongest of the stock they took. That is why I will always say to brothers and sisters that come here that we are so strong that the sky is not even our limit, it's our starting point. So we will continue in the other rooms and see more of the place. And please, as I said earlier, your questions are warmly welcome. Please come.
Think about it, think about it, think about it, think about it, think about it.